Snow drifted down in soft, steady flakes, turning the city plaza into a quiet world of white and gold. The enormous Christmas tree shimmered with warm lights, and the soft glow reflected against the polished windows of the towering office building behind it. Inside that building, at the very top floor, he was known as a powerful CEO, decisive, admired, untouchable. But tonight, sitting alone on a cold wooden bench beneath the glowing tree, he looked like anything but powerful. His tailored black coat did little to shield him from the chill, yet it wasn't the winter air that made his chest ache. It was Christmas Eve, and despite the millions in his bank account, the awards on his walls, and the employees who depended on him, he had nowhere to go. The woman he had loved had left years ago, tired of competing with conference calls and late-night deals. His parents were gone. His home, a sprawling penthouse, felt more like a museum than a place to live. He stared at the wrapped gift box in his gloved hands, a present he had bought out of habit rather than hope, and for a brief, unguarded moment, his eyes filled with tears. Across the plaza, a little girl in a bright red coat and green knit hat noticed him. She was no older than 6, her cheeks rosy from the cold, her boots crunching lightly against the snow. She had been laughing moments earlier, spinning beneath the falling flakes while her mother watched fondly from a short distance away. But children have a way of sensing sadness adults try to hide. The girl slowed, her curious eyes fixed on the man who looked so out of place among the holiday cheer. While others took selfies by the tree and couples walked hand in hand, he sat alone, shoulders heavy, staring at nothing. The little girl tilted her head, clutching her own small present to her chest. To her, tears meant someone needed help, and help was something her mother always gave. Without hesitation, she took a few determined steps toward the lonely stranger, unaware that she was about to interrupt not just his evening, but perhaps the direction of his entire life. The little girl stopped just a few steps away from him, her small boots leaving neat prints in the fresh snow. Up close, she could see that he wasn't just cold. He was sad. Really sad. She tightened her grip on the tiny wrapped gift in her hands and looked back, briefly at her mother, who stood several feet away, watching carefully but allowing her daughter the freedom to be brave. The CEO quickly straightened when he noticed her, brushing his tears away with the back of his gloved hand, embarrassed to have been seen. He forced a polite smile, the kind he used in boardrooms and public interviews. "Hello," he said gently, his voice deeper and softer than she expected. The little girl studied him for a moment with complete seriousness, as if she were making an important decision. "Mister," she said in a small but steady voice, "why are you crying?" "It's Christmas." Her innocence pierced him more sharply than any business question ever had. He hesitated, unsure how to explain decades of ambition, sacrifice, and regret to someone who still believed in Santa Claus. "I'm not crying," he replied quietly, though his red eyes betrayed him. She frowned slightly, unconvinced. "My mommy says when grown-ups say they're not crying but their eyes are wet, it means their heart hurts." The words hit him harder than she could possibly know. His heart did hurt. It hurt from missed bedtime stories, from unanswered calls, from choosing contracts over connections. Before he could respond, the little girl stepped closer and gently placed her small hand on his sleeve. "Don't cry, mister. You can borrow my mom." She pointed proudly toward the woman standing nearby. "She gives the best hugs. And she makes hot chocolate when someone is sad." For a moment, he couldn't speak. No investor had ever offered him something so sincere. No colleague had ever seen through him so clearly. He followed her finger and met the mother's eyes, warm, kind, slightly apologetic, yet understanding. The CEO let out a shaky breath that turned into a faint, unexpected laugh. "Borrow your mom?" he repeated softly. The little girl nodded confidently. "Just for tonight, so you won't be alone." And in that simple, generous offer, something inside him began to melt. Something far colder than the winter air around them. For a few seconds, the world seemed to pause. The snow continued to fall. The Christmas lights continued to glow. But Daniel felt as if everything had shifted. The little girl stood confidently in front of him, her small hand still resting on his sleeve, as if she had just solved the biggest problem in the world. Her mother slowly approached, a gentle smile on her face and a hint of apology in her eyes. I hope she's not bothering you, the woman said warmly. She has a very big heart. Daniel quickly shook his head, standing up from the bench. No, she's not bothering me at all, he replied, his voice unsteady but sincere. She might have just saved my Christmas. The mother introduced herself as Anna, and her daughter proudly announced her own name as Lily, as though Daniel might forget it. Lily immediately took charge. See, I told you he needed us, she whispered loudly to her mom. Anna laughed softly and then looked at Daniel. We were just heading to a small cafe across the street for hot chocolate before going home. You're welcome to join us, if you'd like. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't used to invitations without contracts attached, without expectations or obligations. Just kindness, pure and simple. For years, he had been the one people approached for favors, for investments, for signatures. No one had invited him anywhere just because they didn't want him to feel alone. He glanced at the brightly lit office building behind the plaza. His building, then back at the glowing Christmas tree and the two strangers offering him warmth. For the first time in a long while, he chose something other than work. I would like that, he said quietly. Inside the cozy cafe, Lily insisted he sit between her and her mom. She talked endlessly about school, about Santa, about how her mom made the best pancakes in the world. Daniel found himself smiling. Genuinely smiling, not the practiced corporate grin he wore at conferences. When Anna handed him a steaming cup of hot chocolate, their fingers brushed briefly, and he felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Connection. That night, Daniel didn't feel like a CEO, he felt human. And as Lily leaned sleepily against her mother's shoulder, he realized success meant nothing without someone to share it with. Christmas hadn't changed the world, but a little girl's simple offer had changed his. The warmth of the cafe lingered, with Daniel long after the cups of hot chocolate were empty. When they finally stepped back outside, the snowfall had softened into a light shimmer, dusting the streets in silver. Lily held his hand on one side and her mother's on the other, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Daniel couldn't remember the last time someone had held his hand without hesitation or expectation. It felt strangely grounding. When they reached Anna's small car parked along the curb, Lily surprised him again by wrapping her tiny arms tightly around his waist. See, you're not sad anymore, she declared proudly. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat and gently hugged her back. No, he admitted softly. I'm not. Anna smiled at him, her eyes thoughtful. No one should be alone on Christmas, she said. There was no pity in her voice, only kindness. Daniel nodded, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small wrapped gift he had been holding earlier. I bought this out of habit, he explained awkwardly. I didn't know who it was for, but I think I do now. He handed it to Lily. Her eyes widened with delight as she looked at her mother for permission before opening it. Inside was a delicate snow globe with a tiny family standing beneath a sparkling Christmas tree. Lily gasped. It's us, she said innocently. And though it wasn't exactly true, Daniel felt something shift in his heart at her words. After they drove away, Daniel stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the taillights disappear into the night. The city no longer felt quite so cold. Instead of returning to his empty penthouse, he walked back toward his office building. But this time, he wasn't thinking about profits or meetings. He was thinking about time, about second chances. The next morning, on Christmas Day, Daniel made a decision that would surprise everyone at the company. He postponed his overseas expansion meeting and instead arranged a week off. He made a phone call he had been too proud to make for years to his ex-wife. And later that afternoon, carrying gifts and a nervous but hopeful heart, he knocked on his son's door. Because sometimes it takes a child's simple kindness to remind a grown man what truly matters. Christmas afternoon felt different from any other day Daniel could remember. The snow had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and bright beneath a pale winter sun. Standing outside his ex-wife's house with a carefully wrapped gift in his hands, Daniel felt more nervous than he had before any major business presentation. For years, he had convinced himself that sending expensive gifts and monthly transfers was enough to prove he cared. But now, after one small girl's simple act of kindness had cracked open his guarded heart, he understood how wrong he had been. Money filled accounts. It did not fill empty chairs at dinner tables. When the door finally opened, his young son stood there, taller than Daniel remembered, surprise spreading across his face. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel crouched down slightly, his voice unsteady but honest. "I know I've missed a lot," he said quietly, "but I don't want to miss any more." The words felt strange, raw, and unpolished, but they were real. His son hesitated only a moment before stepping forward into an awkward, tight hug. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magically healed, but it was a beginning. Inside the house, conversation came slowly at first. There were pauses, careful words, and years of distance sitting quietly between them. Yet Daniel did something he had rarely done before. He listened. He listened to stories about school projects, about soccer practice, about small everyday moments he had once considered insignificant. And he realized those were the moments that truly built a life. Later that evening, as he drove home, Daniel didn't feel the crushing loneliness that had overwhelmed him the night before. Instead, he felt determination. The following week, he made changes within his company, introducing policies that encouraged employees to prioritize family time during holidays. He delegated more responsibilities, choosing presence over constant control. Success, he realized, didn't disappear when he stepped away for a few hours. But relationships could. A few days later, he found himself back at the same snowy plaza, hoping to see Lily and her mother again. This time, he wasn't a lonely man hiding tears on a bench. He carried 3 cups of hot chocolate and a quiet smile. Because sometimes, the greatest leadership lesson doesn't come from a boardroom. It comes from a child who simply says, "You don't have to be alone.